All right, welcome class. So let's look at this problem over here. It says example 2. It says we have to solve this equation. Now, this is where the level of difficulty gets a little bit higher for the class. Before we actually try and do this question, what I want you to do is on a separate piece of paper, let's try and just do this question over here. Okay, so take your time, take out a piece of paper, and let's work on this question here. And it says square root of x minus 3 is equal to the square root of x minus 9. Now, what is the general strategy when you're solving equations like this? We want to get the radical by itself, right? Like when we solve questions like this. But notice that, like, let's say if I say, okay, I want to get the radical by itself. So, what can I do? Notice, is the radical by itself? No. This radical is by itself. But like, if I want to get this radical by itself, then let's say if I do plus 3, then I have, what happens here? Then this is square root of x. So you see now this radical is by itself, but then this radical is not by itself. So no matter where I put the 3, a radical will never be by itself, okay? So the idea is, all right, so then how do I solve this problem? Well, okay, it's a little tricky, but the idea for it is let's see what happens if we do this, right? Like we can't get this radical by itself. So let's just square both sides. Okay? Let's see what happens. Well, okay, if I square both sides, this cancels, right? So then you're left with, on the right side, you have just x minus 9. Now, what about over here? How do you do this? Like, how do you do square root of x minus 3, the whole thing squared? What you have to do is, and it's actually possible, you have to do 2 of these. Okay? Equals x minus 9. But then how do you FOIL this? Because it gets very tricky. Let's take a look at this. Just trust yourself. What is the square root of x times the square root of x? And here I'm just going to write this on the side. And actually, we could just do this on the side itself, right? What is square root of x times square root of x? Okay, and this is separate from the problem, right? Square root of x times square root of x. In the previous video, it's just x. If you feel like you're confused on why it's x, please raise your hand, okay? Then what's the next move? Trust your, like FOIL, right? It goes this to this, and what's the next one? This to this. Now here, what is the square root of x? The square root of x times a negative 3. That's just equal to negative 3 square root x. Okay, let me fix the camera a little bit. Okay. You see, this square root of x times this negative 3 is negative 3 square root of x, because you're just doing negative 3 times the square root of x. And the same thing happens here. This negative 3 times square root of x is just negative 3 square root of x. Okay? And then this part over here is easy peasy. Negative 3 times negative 3, that is positive 9. Okay? So now that we FOILed it, let's put all these 4 together. So now we have x minus 3 radical x minus 3 radical x plus 9 equals x minus 9. Okay? And now you see the idea over here is, once we get to this point, can we combine these 2 terms? And you can. So a little sidetrack. This doesn't have to do with the problem. But like if I have x plus x, and please write this in your notes, right? This is very important. Like if I have x plus x, this is 2x. Like if I have 3x plus 4x, this is 7x. But if I have 2 radical x plus 5 radical x, then this is 7 radical x. If I have 3 square root of x plus 3 plus 4 times x square root of x plus 3. See how these 2 are the same? These are like terms. You can combine it so it's just 7 square root of x plus 3. So the idea for this part over here is you can combine these two. Notice that negative 3 minus 3, this becomes x minus 6 radical x plus 9 equals x minus 9. So you can combine these two. So now once you get to this point, you're like, okay, mister, I see how you kind of got there, but how do I continue further? Like, what's the next move? Notice that when we started the problem, we had two radicals, right? Actually, my bad, the camera angle is very bad. When we first started, we had two radicals, and you couldn't get a radical by itself. But now look over here, you see now, originally we had two radicals, and now we have one radical. So now that we have one radical, what's your strategy right now? Get the radical solo. So once you get to this point, let's get this negative 6 square root of x, let's get it by itself. And how would you do that? You can do minus x, minus 9, minus 9. And notice that what happens here, this cancels, this stays the same, this cancels, this is x minus x is 0, and negative 9 minus 9, this is negative 18. Okay? And then how can you continue further? You see, now that the radical is by itself, what was the reason to get the radical by itself? Because now we can square both sides again. Okay? Just because we squared it once doesn't mean we can't do this trick again. So that's the idea. Now here, what is negative 6? Let's do this on this side. What is negative 6 square root x squared, right? Just to show this again, this is negative square root x times negative 6 square root x. Negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36. And square root of x times square root of x times square root of x is x. And here, if you say, what is negative 18 squared? Remember, that's negative 18 times negative 18. So 36x is equal to, this is what, 324. Okay? And then once you get this, divide 36, x equals 9. Right? Okay. Or, you know what you could have done? I just realized. You see how this was one way to do it. Another way to have done it is, you see, once you got this equals negative 18, you could have also done this. You could have divided both sides by negative 6, right? Because what's negative 6 doing to the square root of x? It's multiplying. So you could divide both sides, and now here you have square root of x equals 3. Then once you get to this point, then you square both sides, and x equals 9. You could have also done it this way too, okay? Or you could have done it that way. But you see, we did all this work to be able to try and understand this type of problem. But you see, you're not done yet, because don't forget, once you get x equals 9, you got to check it. Okay, let's see if it works. This is the original, right? Square root of x minus 3 equals square root of x minus 9. So x equals 9, right? So let's see if this works with the check. Let's substitute 9. So square root of 9 minus 3 is equal to square root of 9 minus 9. Square root of 9 is 3 minus 3 equals square root of 0. And it's 3 minus 3 is 0. And what's the square root of 0? It works. So this is a solution. Whew. All right. Not easy, right? What I want you to do is try and do this question by yourself. Now let's see what happens, right? Okay. I will do this question with you. So here, notice you have two radicals, right? So you can't get this by itself. I mean, like, you can't get a radical by itself. So you could do it two ways. You could square both sides. But if you square both sides, then what's going to happen? Let's see what happens if we do that. Let's show both ways. So let's say if I have this, square root of x plus square root of x plus 3 equals 3. Let's say you say, oh, Mr. G, let's square both sides. If you do this, it gets very tricky because this is 9, but then you have to do this. You have to FOIL 2 of these, and this is messy. It is not nice to do. Is it possible? Yes, but I wouldn't do that. What I would do to make my life a little easier, I would subtract one of these to the other side. And let's see why. Because if I do square root of x minus square root of x on one side and minus square root of x on the other side, now I have square root of x plus 3 is equal to 3 minus square root x. And now here, if I square both sides, okay, square, square, now here, notice this cancels, so I have x plus 3 equals, now this is not as bad, okay, to do 2 of these. And you have to remember how we did something very similar to this when we did that, okay? So what I want you to do is try by yourself to continue forward. Do not wait for me to do everything, okay? Pause the video, trust yourself, try and do this on your own, right? So let's see, x plus 3 equals. Now if you want to see how it's done, take your time. 3 times 3, 9. 3 times negative radical x is negative 3 radical x. Here to here, negative 3 radical x. And here to here, negative times negative is positive. Square root of x times square root of x is x. Okay? But then here, oh, it's very similar to the other problem, but this becomes what? Negative 6 radical x plus x. Okay? Now, how do you continue further? What's the next move? Right? Notice when we started the problem, we had 2 radicals, and we couldn't get a radical by itself. But now you have one single radical, so you can get this radical by itself. How would you do it? Right? So you do minus x, minus 9, minus 9. The idea is to get this guy, this negative 6 radical x, you want to get this by itself. So notice this is 0, and what are you left with on the right side? You're left with negative 6 radical x. And then this is 0, and what's 3 minus 9 is negative 6. Okay? And now from here, what can you do? You could divide both sides by negative 6. So now this becomes, what's negative 6 divided by negative 6? This is 1 equals square root x. And then once you get to this point, square both sides, this cancels, 1 equals x. Or x equals 1. Okay? Now, let's see if it works. We got to check it. So check. If I have square root of x plus square root of x plus 3 equals 3, and x equals 1, well, let's see, square root of 1 plus square root of 1 plus 3 equals 3. This is 1 plus square root of 4 equals 3. This is 1 plus 2 equals 3. 3 equals 3. Check. So it does work. Okay, and let's fix that 3. Okay. This is algebra 2, right? It gets more difficult. So try your best to do this one over here and this one over here. Okay, good luck.